I'm Karen.
I'm Amy.
And today we will be teaching you about Chapter 9.2, Implication and Equivalence.
Change every week, I won't stay in the middle. I'll kill it.
So let's get started. An implication is known as a combination of two propositions to make an if-then statement. It is said P implies Q, or if P, then Q. In symbolic form, it is written as P, arrow, Q. And remember to have the arrow pointing one way only. The first proposition, P, is known as the antecedent, and the second proposition, Q, is known as the consequence. For our implication truth table, for our antecedent P, we will always have two truth values and two false values. For our consequence Q, we will always have two truth values and two false values listed in this order: true, false, true, and then false again. Now, all of our outcomes will be true except for when our antecedent is true and our consequence is false. In that case, the outcome would then be false. Let's do a quick review before we move on to example 1. Okay, an implication is a combination of two propositions to make an if-then statement. It is said P implies Q, and if P, then Q. And the symbolic form of an implication is written as P, arrow, Q. And remember, the first proposition is an antecedent, and the second is a consequence. Example 2, our P is Amy walks into class late and loud, and our Q is Miss Sandoval will get irritated and give more work. So our implication would be if Amy walks into class late and loud, then Miss Sandoval will get irritated and give more work. So always remember that when doing these, never leave off your if from the beginning, or it is not an implication, and never change the tense because then it would be wrong.
Hi guys, this is Amy. So today we will be talking about equivalence statements. And before I start, I'm sorry about the scene, but this is a mirror and it's going to act like a whiteboard to me. And the top I have a little lamp so you can see me, because the light doesn't really help. There you go, that lamp. There's another lamp to that, but yeah, I didn't want to turn that on. Okay, so let's get started. First off, what is an equivalence statement? An equivalence statement is a combination of two propositions to make an if and only if statement.
An equivalence statement, we write it as, in symbolic form, as P, double arrow, Q.
If we can say that if P, then Q, and if Q, then P, then therefore we can say if and only if P, then Q. In order for us to do this, if P, then Q has to be true, and if Q, then P has to also be true in order to say if and only if P, then Q. So that would be true. Okay, so now let's put all of this into a truth table. So we have P, and we have Q, and then we have if P and only if P, then Q with the double-headed arrow. So in a truth table, we're always going to have two truth values and two false values for P. And we're going to have two truth values and two false values for Q as well. But it's in a different form. It's in a pattern. It's true, false, true, and then false. So we know that in an equivalence statement, in order for it to be true, they both must be true, or they both must be false. So for example, like this one, the top one, the first one, it's true and then true. That's going to be true. And the second one, it's true, false, and then what else is there? There's also false and true. So those two, there's one false and one true. So that can't be an equivalent statement, because an equivalent statement means that they must be equivalent. And these aren't equivalent. This one's true, false. So that's false. This one's false and true. So that's false as well. Because they're not equivalent to each other. But the last one, both falses make a true value. Because they both are true. They both are false, which makes a true value. Because they're equivalent. Now let's do an example. Okay, here's example 1. Let P represent as Karen believes in Buddha, and let Q be represented as Amy will be her friend. So write the following statement in words as an equivalent statement. So we would ask you guys to write it as if and only if P, then Q. That's an equivalent statement. Remember that because there's a double-sided arrow. So the answer, the response would be, if and only if Karen believes in Buddha, then Amy will be her friend. Okay, so let's do example 2. If and only if, remember that the if and only if always goes in the front, in the beginning of the sentence. If and only if students clean up after themselves, then Miss Sandoval will let us grub. So here's example 2. And sometimes they would ask you to write the symbolic form of this example. So the symbolic form would be if and only if P, then Q. Because this students clean up after themselves is the first proposition, and Miss Sandoval will let us grub is the second proposition. So, and we have an if, and don't forget that we have an if and only if statement up here. Every time we have an if and only if statement, they'll know that there needs to be a double-sided arrow, a two-headed arrow. So, if and only if students clean up after themselves, then Miss Sandoval will let us grub. And that if and only if statement goes in the middle of the P, the first proposition, and the Q, the second proposition. Not face like the board, and while we're talking, she doesn't think I'm you, and then she wants to go like this, to make an if and only if statement. So say if, okay, so an equivalent statement is a combination of two propositions. Okay, so in symbolic form, we say that, in symbolic form, we say equivalence as, who is it? Open the door!